His name was Ted Bundy.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too.
He sure has a way with people.
And if you think you know his story,
I don't want there to be any secrets between us.
think again.
We are talking about Ted Bundy, or also known as Bundy. So this is a 2002 movie. I know there have been a variety of movies that came out. There was one relatively recently that starred Zac Efron. But this is a 2002 movie directed by Matthew Bright and stars Michael Reilly Burke as Ted Bundy. You've also got a supporting role from Tom Savini as well, in a relatively small role, admittedly. And this obviously details the true life events that had one of America's worst prolific serial killers in kind of history, and had his tale of destruction across America in the kind of the mid-70s. So this movie takes place between, I think, 1974 and 1976 or 77, I think it was. And so the last few years of the kind of of his life, and shows you his kind of like his killing spree across America, where he committed a vast atrocities of sexually orientated murders among many young women, where he, you know, raped, killed, desecrated, and did necrophiliac things as well with some of them. So it was pretty hardcore stuff. This is a relatively low budget movie. I think the budget's about $1.5 million. As far as I can be, as far as I'm aware, and but nonetheless, I think it's a solid production. So let's talk about first of all what works. But I have to kind of say, I'm going to be talking about the film. I'm not going to be critiquing or commenting on the kind of the real life of Ted Bundy. I kind of don't want to comment too much on obviously the victims and things like that. So we are only going to be talking about it in regards to the actual this film rather than kind of real life, but. I have to say, I think one of the strengths of this film is a really solid performance from Christopher Reeve lookalike Michael Reilly Burke, who gives a real strong performance, I think, as Bundy. You know, a definite kind of unsettled sort of guy who you can see on the surface how he would sort of appear to be somewhat charming initially, but also you dig a little deeper and he obviously has problems, and you see within the movie that some women kind of maybe aren't quite taken aback by his weirdness, but a lot of them are, and they kind of just are gullible or trusting, and you know they kind of just buy into whatever a line he's trying to sell them at the time. But I think it's a great performance, and I thought he does, you know, it's very well. Hell of a look, looks like Christopher Reeve, though. It's very disconcerting. I have to say as well, I think the direction here is really strong. Matthew Bright, I think, does some fantastic work here, just using the kind of the camera work and stuff, and sort of tricks using the off focus and close-ups and things like this to kind of demonstrate the kind of turmoil that's kind of going into Ted Bundy's head, to give you an idea that it's just like, you know, a real mess in there really, and kind of demonstrating how you know, how potentially ill he really is. And then as the movie progresses, we see more overt things obviously on camera, you know, him masturbating outside a woman's house, and his gradual kind of you know, descent into more depravity, and as the things kind of get worse and worse and worse. We also see him trying to have kind of you know, relationships with a partner, and I wonder if kind of like, you know, things like, well, I'm assuming like TV shows like Dexter are obviously taking inspiration from real life cases like this, where they had that kind of dual life, and even the guy's girlfriend in this, who they have changed all the names for, but you know, how she kind of puts up with some stuff, although she knows something's wrong. Obviously, she has no idea what's really going on. But I find it's fascinating stuff. I think the movie as well actually treads quite a fine line of showing you the kind of the monstrous things that he's being done, without it seeming too exploitative in a way. I mean, we do see some kind of some pretty horrific things, but I don't think it's particularly explicit in what we actually see on screen, but you get the idea. I mean, there are a good few sequences where we see literally Ted Bundy got club women on the head and things like that. But we don't see him like removing heads and things like that. So I think the movie does a good job of kind of navigating that very tricky tightrope of kind of not wanting to be too kind of shocking for the sake of being shocking sake, but also be shocking enough to kind of get you the idea about how, you know, the atrocities that this guy sort of done. And I thought it did that quite well. I think the movie is genuinely engaging, you know, as well. Obviously, you know, kind of it gives you somewhat of an insight into this guy's mind, and you know, I won't profess to be a particularly knowledgeable about the real case. To be honest with you, I know the kind of the broad strokes of it, but as I understand, although they have changed some stuff, which we'll come on to, it's the gist of what actually happened as well. And I think the end of it, I mean, I guess it's not really a spoiler, but I think that's, again, it's a powerful scene and kind of and done in a way which I think is shocking, but kind of, you know, it really is quite realistic and harrowing in its own right. It's also got added some few scenes here and there of real footage that was taken along the time where people were kind of you know, camping outside the prison where he was being held and stuff like this with kind of banners and things. There's a few interviews and as well as a few photos. So I think it does a good job of making it an interesting piece. What doesn't work, I think the movie tends to gloss over a fair amount. I think because this is based on a true story and there are many victims involved here, you feel like you are getting broad strokes of the kind of the story, and it kind of feels like it's glossing over a lot of the stuff, you know, in my opinion. Particularly how, for example, how the police are involved. Because, you know, at least how it seems in this film, and again, I'm not saying this is what happened in real life, you almost feel like the police luck into kind of catching him a few times, and, you know, how they kind of got his name and things like that. He's just kind of like, we really don't see much of that. It's just kind of like it just happens on the next sort of screen and stuff, and it just feels like because this is a 90-minute movie, they just have to kind of brush past a lot of the stuff, unfortunately, and therefore it feels like it never really goes in depth in any particular area. The most in depth that it does, I would say, is the relationship between him, Ted Bundy, and his kind of like his girlfriend. That to me is the kind of the where we spend most of our kind of time and how their relationship is, and it is, you know, it's a fascinating look, but I actually would have maybe have a little bit more of an all-rounded look, and maybe this would have been better as a mini-series, to be honest with you. I thought there was just a lot to unpack here. I mean, even documentaries that you have on these things tend to go on for multiple parts, so it feels like it's glossing over a lot. The decision was also made to change a lot of the details. Now, like I said, I'm not the expert on Ted Bundy by any means, but reading about it, they've changed a lot of the details. Pretty much everyone's name has changed here, with the exception of Ted Bundy, to fictionalised names. I'm assuming that was just to kind of stop victims, the real victims, kind of like names being kind of Googled, or I guess not in 2002, but just kind of like to give them some anonymity, I suppose. But there are other things as well that they've changed. For example, again, as far as I know, Ted Bundy in the movie was a student who was studying law and I think psychology, and he was flunking both of them. But in real life, he was actually doing relatively well in the sort of psychology side of things, and you know, there's a variety of other kind of details that were just changed, I think, to give it somewhat of a fictionalised version, where sometimes I thought it was not necessarily, you know, prudent to do that. I would have actually kind of liked to have seen a little bit more kind of backstory, and like I said, I think this maybe would have benefited from either being a longer film, or maybe a series, because I feel like we could have had a little bit more leading up to it. We get a little bit of exposition about his childhood and how his kind of parents were, so we get a little bit, but again, I would have maybe have liked to have seen a little bit more involved in that, and a little bit more how the kind of the police were kind of involved in the kind of the investigation side of it, rather than just the arrests, which is kind of all that we actually see. Apparently there are a lot of like scenes that involved Tom Savini that were actually cut from the movie. So we may have had that at some point, but in the final product, ultimately it was cut. But nonetheless, I think this is a solid movie. And I remember watching this one along with the rest of the kind of the serial killer films that came out around the kind of the 2000s sort of mark, you know, the 2005 mark. And I did think this was the best out of all of them. You know, the Gacy, the Night Stalker, the Ed Gein one and all that. But yeah, so this one I'm actually going to give a 7 out of 10. I think it's a solidly made film. It could have been a little bit more in depth. And I think would probably benefit more from a series and stuff. But have you seen this 2002 version? And if you have seen the other versions, that, for example, the Zac Efron one, how did you think it compares? 7 out of 10 from me. What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.